Today is August 20, 2022. Hello, my name is Brett. I am the host of this channel on YouTube, and I am going to bring you today the reading and discussion of the book, The Seventh Vial. I am going to go back a chapter to chapter 14, and we're going to continue with the chapter titled The Two-Horned Beast of the Earth. And the reason I am doing this is because it's been far too long since I've been in this book and reading it and discussing it with you, my subscribers to this channel. First off, I would like to thank Alec for his contribution to making this PDF and making this reading possible. And he is currently doing some work on his website, the Lutheran Library Publishing Ministry website, that is. And I would encourage everyone to go over there and check that out. And I do believe he also has a blog too. I was checking that out a little bit just a minute ago. So we're going to go ahead and continue here. And I'm going to be doing this recording solo today, just to get back into the rhythm of this book, because this is a very interesting book, and I would like to continue and do more readings eventually here, although things have been very, very busy in my life. I've been working a lot and doing a lot of carpentry, so I haven't taken much time to dedicate to doing these reading and discussions, but provided I have the time, I will do this more. And just trying to, make a living and catch up with all of my debts, as all of you may well be having the same problems as I do, or not. I don't know, but all I know is we are not supposed to be in debt. We are supposed to have plenty stored away for the future. And my concern is, with the way things are going, we don't have much time to prepare for what's coming. We're going to be seeing some hard times. It's obvious. But anyway, back to our reading and discussion of this book by James Aiken Wylie. This book is well over 160 years old, and very, very important to take a look at what has happened in the light of what James Aiken Wylie is saying. So let's go right in. Quote, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon," unquote. We intend here to simply indicate in a few brief sentences who this lamb-like beast is, and then pass on to the grand catastrophe. It is the ecclesiastical hierarchy which we take to be here symbolized. The vision brings the Pope again before us. In the beast of the sea, he is seen as the ruling head of the 10 papal kingdoms. Here, he is beheld as the ruling head of the papal clergy. This beast rose out of the earth, the symbol of the Western Empire in its tranquilized state. He had two horns like a lamb. The key of the symbol is found in our Lord's warning, quote, "Beware of them that come to you in sheep's clothing," unquote. Such was the clothing in which the beast of the earth appeared, a circumstance which fixes upon him a clerical character. He is called, quote, "another beast," unquote. It has ever been the policy of the popes to keep their ecclesiastical distinct from their temporal kingdom. They have governed it by distinct assemblies, laws, and officers. Their clergy have generally been exempt from the ordinary tribunals and taxes, and amenable in both respects to the Pope alone. Thus has the ecclesiastical estate appeared before the world as, quote, another beast. The two horns indicate, we are disposed to think, the two powerful organizations through which the ecclesiastical jurisdiction was wielded. The clergy, the clergy of the Pope were divided into regular and secular. They were the two arms of his strength. Bishops and priests, with the machinery of councils and synods, were a powerful instrumentality for executing the pontifical will, but an equally pliable and effective instrumentality for the same purpose did the Pope find in the numerous monkish orders which covered Europe. These were the two horns of the ecclesiastical beast. The beast of the earth was a pretended minister of Christ. We say pretended because while he had horns as a lamb, he, quote, he spake as a dragon, unquote. The dragon is the symbol of pagan Rome. The popes displayed all the lust, cruelty, ambition, tyranny of the Caesars. But it was in his speech mainly that he was to display the characteristics of the dragon, which clearly points to the character of his teachings. The religion which the hierarchy of Rome inculcated was paganism, very slightly disguised. The doctrine of the popes was the doctrine of devils. We might instance in proof the morality of the Jesuits, some of those whose leading maxims are that it is lawful to do evil, that good may come, that excommunicated princes may be murdered, that no faith may be kept with heretics, and that actions, however contrary to the divine law, may be innocently performed if the person is able, even ideally, to join a good end to them, or, in the style of the Jesuits, to direct aright the intention. In these, the dragon speaks, quote, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beasts before him, unquote. It is here foretold that the last should be first, last in coming up, but first in respect of the rule it should exercise. And as the prophecy foretold, so it happened. The spiritual has clothed itself with the prerogatives and executed the functions of the temporal. By his doctrine of pontifical supremacy, the Pope really grasped the secular government of Europe. In the Middle Ages, he claimed and exercised direct temporal supremacy, and in virtue thereof, he put himself above all kings and sustained himself supreme judge in all cases, temporal and spiritual. In those days, he never scrupled to show himself openly to the world with the keys of Peter in the one hand and the sword of Caesar in the other, pleading as his warrant for thus uniting the diadem and the mitre, the commission given to Jeremiah, quote, see, I have this day set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms to root out and to pull down and to destroy and to throw down and to build and to plant," unquote. After the Reformation, the Pope claimed only an indirect temporal supremacy. That is, the power of passing sentences in spiritual matters carrying temporal effects, however, to the extent, should the cases be so, of the dethronement of monarchs and the releasing of subjects from their allegiance. At this day, the Pope claims only the power of direction. In virtue of this power, he can determine whether a sovereign's title to be or not be valid, whether an oath of allegiance is existent or non-existent, whether it is or is not the subject's duty to rebel. In short, he can bring within the providence of direction the whole domain of political, social, and moral duty, and the whole question of princes' prerogatives and subjects' rights, sanctioning or annulling them as it may seem right to him. This is not else than muffled temporal supremacy. It is, in truth, more formidable than direct temporal power, inasmuch as it works noiselessly and invisibly, is believed to be divine and impotent, can evacuate laws of their force and sovereigns of their authority, and lay prostrate beneath its foot the conscience and the reason, the bodies and the souls of men. Thus has the second beast come in before the first, and under pretense of honoring him, he has despoiled him of his functions, reduced him to vassalage, and done his work. It is added, quote, "And he causeth the earth and them who dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed," unquote. The papal clergy were the great preachers of passive obedience. They were the grand supporters of both secular and spiritual despotism, though their instrumentality mainly was the world plunged into slavery and kept enslaved for so many ages. No human power can prevent a people enlightened by religion from achieving their independence, and no human power can make a superstitious and ignorant people other than slaves. What advances might the world by this time have made in the principles of civil liberty and of physical science, but for this grand obstacle to progress? The great discoveries in physics and mechanics, which have distinguished our times, might have been made ages ago, and more numerous, beautiful, and useful applications of them, but for this hindrance. The laws by which nations are to be governed, commerce carried on, and the intercourse of states with one another regulated, are only beginning to be understood. And why only now? Because mind was completely overborne by a church which placed all virtue and wisdom in the maxim that the world should worship the beast, quote, "and he doeth great wonders," unquote. Who has not heard of the pretended miracles of the Popish Church, the palpable cheats, gross delusions, and impudent falsehoods which she has practiced in support of her authority? Transubstantiation alone, which her priests are performing every day, were enough to confer on that church unrivaled preeminence as a wonder worker. Nor are the wonders of the beast sometimes of this very harmless kind. Quote, he maketh fire to come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, unquote. Has he not arrogated to himself the power of wielding the thunderbolts of God? What dreadful curses with bell, book, and candle has he not pronounced on the persons, goods, and souls of his victims? These anathemas struck terror into the hearts of the bravest and laid the mightiest monarchs prostrate in the dust. No armies, no human might could avail the man against whom had been launched the thunders of the seven hills. The fire of heaven could not have been more instantaneous or more deadly. With this fire, how often was the Pope scathed whole nations at once? With this fire, how often has the Pope scathed whole nations at once? When the sentence of excommunication was thundered against a kingdom, what wailing, despair, suffering overspread it? The whole course of life was instantly arrested. The churches were closed. The sacraments were interdicted. And whoever died while the excommunication was in force, his body lay unburied and his soul was cast out of paradise. The second beast, addressing the dwellers on the papal earth, said to them, quote, that they should make an image to the beast that had a wound by a sword. The quote-unquote beast that had the wound by a sword was the pagan Roman Empire. And the subject of that lamb-like beast was a political structure should be set up bearing a close resemblance to the grand old empire which the Goths had swept out of existence. This was actually accomplished in the revival of the quote-unquote Roman Empire under Charlemagne. The Pope had the art to persuade the states of Christendom to form themselves into a federation under the name of the quote-unquote Holy Roman Empire, and to place at its head a prince of their own who should be styled Caesar and should wear the imperial diadem. This empire was the shadow or quote-unquote image of that which had been before it. Its laws, maxims, and religion were the same as those of imperial Rome, whose likeness it bore. It was the servant of the power which had called it into being, and that it might the more effectually execute the bloody decrees of Rome, her priests were peremptory in enjoining on all the dwellers in Europe the duty of rendering obedience, reverence, and service to it. Quote, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, unquote. The image set up by the Pope stood there, not like some great idol fixed movelessly on its pedestal and compelling the veneration of a blinded world by its colossal but intimate bulk, and the resemblance it bore to the terrible empire which had reigned before it. The Pope conjured it unto life. The priests so wrought with their arts, and the image spake as they inspired it, and did the deeds they willed it to do. Quote, that image of the beast should both speak, unquote, speak in blasphemy against God by arrogating his titles and powers, and speak in anathemas against the saints, quote, them that dwell in heaven, unquote, by denouncing all who would not worship him as heretics, and giving their bodies to be burned. It is instructive to observe that while the first beast is said to, quote, make war with the saints, the second beast is represented as doing no more than causing them to be killed. The prophecy is in exact accordance with fact. The popes and bishops did not, with their own hands, murder the saints. They delivered them over to the secular arm and caused them to be killed. Quote, and he caused all, both small, great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. It was customary in ancient times for servants and soldiers to have imprinted on their persons the mark of their master and commander. The mark was sometimes a hieroglyph, sometimes the capital letters of the name, and sometimes the name in full. Popery, too, required its supporters to wear its mark, more or less conspicuously, if not in their forehead, yet in their right hand. That mark consisted in the profession of the Romish faith, without which Rome would not permit any man to enjoy either natural or civil rights. Quote, no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name, unquote. From instances almost innumerable, we shall select only one. Pope Martin V, in his bull issued soon after the Council of Constance, enjoined the professors of the Catholic faith not to permit heretics to have houses in their districts, or enter into contracts, or carry on commerce, or enjoy the comforts of humanity with Christians. This furnishes a striking point of resemblance between the beast whose deadly wound was healed and the image of the beast, between the dragon and the dragon's successor, which, though it wore the lamb's skin, had the dragon's voice. For we find an edict issued against the primitive Christians by the pagan emperor Diocletian in precisely similar terms. According to that edict, quote, the Christians, says Justin Martyr, quote, had not the power of buying or selling anything, nor were they allowed the liberty of drawing water itself before they had offered incense to detestable idols, unquote. But what are we to understand by the number of the first beast, which the second beast was to compel every man to wear? Quote, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Anciently, the letters of the alphabet served as numerals according to a man's name might be expressed by the number indicated by the letters of the name, which used numerals. Thoth, the name of the Egyptian Mercury, was expressed by the number 1218, Jupiter by 737, that being the sum of the numbers taken numerically. We are told that the letters of the name of the beast would make up the number 666, or 666. To discover the name, we have only to take the Greek alphabet and select from it those letters that contain this number. On doing so, we have the word Latinos, or Latin. This shows us that the Latin Empire, that's the ancient Roman Empire, is meant. The word Latinos contains the number 666 and is, moreover, the name of the founder of the fourth monarchy, the name of that monarchy itself, and the name of all its individual members. The evidence appears perfectly satisfactory, according to which we conclude that Latin is the true interpretation of the number of the beast. We might go on in this way, presenting the portraiture of popery, but many volumes would not suffice to contain it, and a whole lifetime would not be long enough to finish it. And this is why I wanted to read this chapter without interruption, without my thoughts too much, is to give you an idea and scope of the width and depth of what James Aiken Wylie has just told us. I think the first time I read this book and I read this chapter, it was astonishing to me, and it's still astonishing. So we continue in our astonishment reading chapter 17, the commencement and termination of the 1260 days. We now come to discuss the question of time. There is a certain period fixed by God between the birth and death of every man. The same providence, by an irresistible decree, has numbered the days of the man of sin, between his appearance above the dark flood and his descent into his burning grave. An interval will elapse of 1260 days, or rather years, This number occurs in the Apocalypse in connection with the existence of Antichrist, not less than 5 times. The Gentiles were to tread the holy city underfoot 42 months. The witnesses were to prophesy clothed in sackcloth 1,260 days. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God for 1,260 days. And in the wilderness she was nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. Power was given unto the beast of the sea to continue 42 months. The period is variously expressed in days, months, times, but its length is the same in all, 1,260 symbolic days or years. The prophecy of Daniel, too, limits the duration of Antichrist to the same period, a time, times, and the dividing of time. Thus, as regards the length of the period, there is no doubt. The papacy cannot possibly survive its 1260th year, dated from its rise. This is the hour of its doom, beyond which neither craft nor power can prolong its existence. Then it goeth into perdition. The main point here, then, is to ascertain the period of the rise of the papacy, 1,260 years added to which will give the epoch of its fall. Of course, its rise must be placed subsequent to the Gothic invasion. For out of that flood did the 10 kingdoms emerge. The 10 kingdoms, as we have already stated, were completed by the opening of the 6th century. We are not, therefore, to look for the full development of the papacy before that century, nor are we to look for it at any era very much subsequent, as must be evident from our former explanations that the 10 kingdoms of Europe, united and governed by the Pope, their last and eighth head, forms the beast of the abyss, whose continuance is limited to 42 months. Do we find any strongly marked epoch occurring soon after the commencement of this century in the history of the 10 kingdoms or of the papacy? Do we find any signal change in the constitution of the first, or any signal enlargement or confirmation in the powers and claims of the second? We do. About the year 530, we find a change passing upon the 10 Gothic kingdoms which made them, in fact, Roman kingdoms, and linked them to the fourth monarchy of Daniel, and made them, in truth, but a continuation of that Roman Empire to which the Gothic invasion had given a deadly wound. From AD 530 to AD 533, Gibbon tells us the Emperor Justinian published his immortal works, the Code, the Pandects, and the Institutes. These contained a digest of the laws of the ancient Roman Empire, which henceforward became the law of the 10 kingdoms. Gibbon remarks that by the execution of this work, quote, Justinian, the Greek emperor of Constantinople and the East, was the legal successor of the Latinian shepherd who had planted a colony on the banks of the Tiber, unquote. Much more would we remark. Was it true of the 10 kingdoms, which now began to be governed by the laws of ancient Rome, and into which the very spirit of Rome was thus breathed, and into which the very spirit of Rome was thus breathed, that it had now become the legal successor of that Latin kingdom which Romulus founded on the banks of the Tiber. The promulgation of the Justinian Code seems to mark the epoch of the full emergence of the 10-horned beast above the Gothic flood. The 10 kingdoms became then the true lineal descendant of pagan Rome. 75 years later, we find another strongly marked epoch in the history of the papacy. In AD 606, the Emperor Phocas confirmed a former recognition of the Pope's authority by Justinian by constituting the Pope's universal bishop and requiring all the churches to acknowledge the papal supremacy. And in AD 608, Phocas gave Pope Boniface the Pantheon, which, from being a temple originally dedicated to all the pagan gods, was henceforward dedicated to the worship of the Virgin Mary and all the martyrs. It had been the high place of pagan idolatry, and now it became the high place of anti-Christian idolatry. We would request our readers specially to mark these two stages in the rise of the papacy. They are Justinian's edict, say AD 532, and Focus Edict, AD 606. Others have traced yet a third stage in the rise of the papacy, the era of Charlemagne. Charlemagne, king of France, was crowned emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo in AD 800. By the help of Charlemagne, the Pope's temporal authority was enlarged and confirmed. 3 of the 10 kings whose territory adjoined the Roman See being abolished, and thus the Pope vested in their authority and their territories, thus fulfilling the prophecy of Daniel that 3 of the horns should be plucked up before the little horn. Now behold, the Antichrist not only risen, but fully revealed to the world. From the summit of the 7 hills, he shows himself to Christendom, decked out in the glories of the Triple Crown and claiming the blasphemous title of Christ's Vicar and God's Vicegerent. From which of these 3 epochs are we to date the commencement of the 1260 years? The opinion that there may be a double or perhaps even a treble commencement of this period is very probable. It is countenanced by the prediction long since fulfilled. The quote-unquote 70 years of Jeremiah determined the length of the captivity in Babylon. But there was at 3 several times a carrying away, and, of course, the question came to be, from which of these periods the commencement of the 70 years should be dated. It was found that as there were 3 commencing stages in the captivity, so there were 3 terminating stages in the return, with exactly 70 years between each. So, to the 3 stages in the rise of the papacy, there may be 3 answering stages in its downfall and total extinction. If we date the commencement of the 1260 years from the era of Justinian, AD 532, we are brought down to 1792. If we date the era of focus, if we date the era of focus, AD 606 through 608, we are brought down to 1866 through 1868. And if we date the era of Charlemagne, AD 800, we cannot look for the downfall of popery till 2060. Let us examine these 3 epochs a little more particularly and see how they correspond with the present state of the world and the papacy. We feel satisfied that we are warranted to make the era of Justinian the primary commencement, at least, of the 1260 years. At that epoch, we behold the 10 kingdoms risen and governed by Roman law, the beast from the sea. If to that we are told to add 1260 years, we are brought down, as we have said, to 1792, the era of the French Revolution. How does that period correspond? Was there any similarity between the rise of the papacy in AD 532 and its fall in 1792? A very striking similarity. In AD 532, we see the quote-unquote 10 kingdoms risen. In 1792, we see them falling before a tremendous political tempest. But further, the Code of Justinian first recognized the Pope's absolute ecclesiastical supremacy, virtually gave the saints into his hand, and placed the civil sword at his disposal. 1,260 years thereafter, at the breaking out of the French Revolution, the leading kingdom in continental Europe, and that one which for ages has been chief stay of the papacy, the chief stay of the papacy, abolished the Pope's supremacy, declared the clergy total independent of the See of Rome, vested the election of bishops in the departmental authorities, and to complete the change, made a national profession of atheism. The two epochs, in their bearing on the papacy, appear the very counterparts of each other. At the one epoch, we find the supreme civil power bent on aggrandizing the Pope, framing all its laws with that special view, and subjecting both secular and spiritual authority to him. At the other epoch, we find the supreme civil power bent on the Pope's overthrow, enacting laws to effect that object and emancipating both the secular and spiritual authorities from his sway. The manifold calamities of which the revolution was productive to the papacy, we shall have a future occasion of stating. We only here further remark that the tremendous blow they inflicted on Rome, she was somewhat repaired, but is very far from having fully recovered. The second epoch, that of Focus, AD 606 through 608, brings us to 1866 through 1868. All admit that the Pope was by this time vested in the title and powers of Christ's vicar. The general consent on this point warrants the conclusion that at this era there was a fuller manifestation of Antichrist, that now at least he was fully come, and that at the corresponding era of 1866 through 1868, he may be overtaken by the plagues of his final ruin, but through the papal system may, about that time, begin to be broken up and swept away as a government. Remnants of popery may linger in being, and the full glory of the millennium, consisting in the restoration of the Jews and the full conversion of the Gentile world, may not be realized toward AD 2000, forming a third period corresponding to the era of Charlemagne. Daniel speaks of two periods, one of 30 and the other of 45 years, making the 75 years in all, which are to be added to the 1260 days. Quote, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days," unquote, which are just 30 days added to the 1260. 30 years after the termination of the 1260 years, we may expect some event bearing with decided effect on the downfall of Antichrist. But a still more blessed change may be expected 45 years after that again. For it is added, "Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days." It is a remarkable coincidence that in the rise of Antichrist, there were 75 years between his primary appearance at the era of Justinian, and his secondary at the era of Focus, and that we find an era of corresponding length in his predicted downfall, extending from the French Revolution to 1866 through 1868, which marks most probably the epoch of his consummated ruin, the interval being filled up with the plagues of the consummation. It is the claim to be Christ's vicar that constitutes the Pope, the Antichrist. That's right. It is the claim to be Christ's replacement that constitutes all of the popes, the Antichrist, the office of the Pope. This claim involves in its supreme dominion, temporal as well as spiritual, and to us it appears a matter of no moment at what time he obtained his insignificant patrimony, seeing his supreme dominion was neither in point of theory nor in point of fact founded upon it. The moment that the Bishop of Rome avowed himself the vicar of Christ and had that claim acknowledged, the Antichrist was come. He had a character allowed him which placed him above sovereigns, entitled him to dispose of their crowns and kingdoms, and to press into his service, when occasion required, the revenues and armies of Europe. This claim was first admitted by Justinian in 533, and more formally and fully recognized by Focus in 608. These 75 years form a broad line marking off the era of the reign of Antichrist and the 1260 days of sackcloth to the witnesses, and a line of equal breadth will mark the termination of his reign, filled up by two terrible catastrophes, the first of which has already passed over the world. The last is most probably opening upon it. The former symbolized in the apocalypse by the harvest, and the latter by the vintage. There are three, and only three, great lines in prophecy, and though the starting point of each is different from that of the others, all three have the common termination, and that common termination lies within our era. The first and longest line is the 7 times, which comprehends the whole period of the domination of idolatry, and by consequence, the whole period of the oppression of the church. We are disposed to say that this period began with the captivity of the 10 tribes under Shalmaneser in BC 728, and running on for 2,520 years. For such is the length of 7 prophetic times, terminated in AD 1792. The second line is that of the cleansing of the sanctuary, Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. Quote, "How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Unquote. Counted from the pushing of the Persian ram in BC 508, its probable starting point, this line too runs out in AD 1792. The third line, also mentioned by Daniel, is the, quote, time, times, and dividing of time, unquote. That is the 3 years and a half, or the 1260 symbolic days or years of the apocalypse. Reckoning from the edict of Justinian in AD 532, when the beast from the sea arose, this period runs out like the other two in 1792. It is striking, first of all, that we should have only 3 great prophetic lines in the Word of God, and that all 3 should relate to the same exceptional period of the world's history, even that of Satan's domination through a succession of idolatrous empires. God, in great mercy to the church, kindled this light to guide her during this dark night, till the dawn of a better state of things should arise. On the side of Satan, these lines are exhibited as eras of triumph. On the side of the church, they are represented as eras of bondage. This would lead us to expect that all 3 should have a common termination. For the breaking up of idolatry necessarily implies the cleansing of that sanctuary which it had defiled, and the overthrow of Antichrist implies the escape of those whom he had held captive, and who now, no longer called to prophesy against him, put off their sackcloth. It is further remarkable that when we trace down these 3 lines, each from its most probable commencement in the past, we find them ending together. But still more striking is it that the era of their common convergence should be one of the grand crises of the world. It is the era of the Great French Revolution. That event sounded the knell of the idolatrous despotisms which, in one form or another, has exercised dominion in the earth from the days of Shalmaneser to 1792, and which had been shown to the king in his dream as but one image or structure, from its head of gold to its 10 toes. Surely it is not by chance that the instant, as it were, that these 3 lines met, the aspect of providence should change, that a new drama should open, that a great earthquake should shake the world, that a mighty political tempest should set in, which begins the cleansing of the sanctuary, in the casting down of those despotic thrones and idolatrous altars, which had so long defiled Christendom. This event, if the death knell to the church, this event, if the death knell to the world power was the trumpet of jubilee to the church, it told her that her period of bondage had expired, that her prison doors had been opened, not opened willingly by her great oppressor, but burst open by the mighty earthquake which had shaken the world. Like a voice from heaven, it invited her to arise from the dust, to put away her chains and her sackcloth, to array herself in her beautiful garments, and to come forth into liberty. Her exodus from Egypt was a great event, so, too, was her exodus from Babylon. These the church had not ceased to celebrate in her songs, but the grandest deliverances of the past were too pale in the presence of that complete, final, and majestic exodus which was now approaching. The song of Moses was to swell in the mightier and loftier song of the Lamb. And this sublime melody was to roll its numbers down the ages till time should merge into eternity. Daniel adds a supplementary line to the three great lines we have mentioned. This line begins when the others terminate and runs on 75 years beyond them, reckoning from about 1792 or 1793, the acme of the French Revolution. These 75 years terminate with the present year. They probably mark the period during which the final plagues, those which the seven thunders uttered, will be inflicted on Antichrist. With terrible, stunning, and consuming swiftness will plague follow plague, till at the end of the 75 years they will culminate in a tremendous stroke, an all-embracing convolution which will shake in pieces and lay prostrate in ruin the whole framework, political and ecclesiastical, of Popish Europe. Yet again, the most probable calculation of the world's chronology makes the world's seventh millenary to begin about 75 years after the epoch which we have fixed on as of the primary termination of the 1260 years. It was an old Jewish opinion, and likewise an early Christian belief, that after the year 6000 dated from the creation, the world's Sabbath would begin. It wants only a little while to the seventh millenary of time. We are on the eve of that long anticipated Sabbath. It already begins to dawn towards that great first day of a coming era of rest and blessedness. Thrice welcome to a world which has been so long desolated by the tempests of war and so long enthralled by the fetters of superstition. And not less welcome to a church which for so many ages has worn only sackcloth. Unless the shadow on the dial of prophecy greatly misleads us, that mighty consummation is at hand. And that ends the reading of chapter 17. And now we're on to chapter 18 for our recording next time. And we'll catch up with you then. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to just let James Aiken Wylie speak for himself here. I'm not going to add anything. But, it's a very, very interesting study. And I would put off that chapter for a long time because basically I just wanted more time to think about it. And I think it's only fair that those of you that have never read this before or come across this work, that you also think about it. And, last thing I want to do here is lead to more confusion. It's very important for everyone to study at their own pace. So we'll catch up with you next time. God bless and Maranatha.